In this daily drop, we're going to be taking a look at a small production I did last week. Well, at least a couple of the scenes from that production. I'll give you a little bit of insight into the thought process behind what we did. So let's go. Okay, kids, it is Sunday here in the barn, which means I am shooting Monday's episode of the Daily Drop. Just a little housekeeping. All episodes of the Daily Drop drop at 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time, Monday through Friday. So even though I don't always have a chance to push out reminders on social, if you go to the channel and you go to the Daily Drop playlist, you will find all of the episodes there. So there was an episode last Thursday, another one on Friday. If you haven't checked those out, please do after this episode. And right now what I'm going to do is talk you through a little bit about this production that I did for a client, an existing client, that asked me to shoot 3 scenes for a small commercial spot. So this is children. It's based on an app. And besides that, I can't really get into the project too much. But the marching orders were to A, find talent, to B, find a location, and C, to execute the actual production itself. So the hardest part there is probably finding talent. So so we did it. We did 2 days of auditions with children. And I have to say that day one, I went out with a mirrorless camera and a more complicated audio setup. And ultimately, it was just an iPhone on a tripod with the wireless Me system. And I'll probably talk about that a little bit more in terms of how things like that are changing, how we're scouting, how we're doing auditions and things like that. But it worked out great. I was able to capture that very simply, effectively, and then show the client the auditions so that they could weigh in on the kids. And then we reached out to the parents, guardians, and made sure that they were available for the date that we wanted. And we were off to the races. And then after that, it was really just making sure we knew what locations we were going to be using. The spot calls for 3 locations, an exterior location and 2 interiors. We basically found what we thought worked well for the exterior. We needed to be able to see a blue sky in that exterior. So what you're looking at right now is actually from the day of production, but it is the direction we were shooting in. So we wanted to make sure that there was backlight there. I had a colleague and friend who's a cinematographer come in for the director of photography role. And we decided that we were going to shoot earlier in the day for a couple of reasons. Number one, we wanted to make sure that we got that backlight looking in that direction. We did have another option looking into a valley, which you can kind of see here when you're looking at the basic, we'll call it lighting setup, which if you look past there, we could have shot in that direction, but that would have put us later in the day. That's when the sun is essentially going down. And one of the talent was a 4.5-year-old kid. And if you have ever dealt with, had, or been around 4.5-year-old kids, later in the day can be quite grumpy if there's no nap and things like that. So we decided earlier in the day. We also thought we would be able to control sound a little bit more effectively then. And then also later in the day in this location, sometimes the winds really pick up. So we wanted to make sure that we were shooting, again, in this direction. So backlight in that direction. And then we'll go back to that shot where you're kind of seeing the base setup and then what it effectively became. We also put up a sound blanket, left side of camera, or camera left in terms of the frame that you're seeing here, not of the hero camera itself. And really the idea was to grab all of that sunlight. So you'll see here the base setup of what we had. which was really this 8x8 frame with a silk. We were using it as a bounce, so it wasn't diffusion. And then there's a 4x4 there with magic cloth, and then one light set to the right-hand side of the frame, which originally had a Fresnel lens on it and barn doors, but it was just a little too hot. So the DP decided to put that inside of a softbox, take the front diffusion off, and essentially just use the baffle, that break inside. And that's effectively the setup there. Now we had two internal locations. I'm going to show you one where I can't show you the setup in terms of the lighting first, but effectively it was identical to the one that we're going to be taking a look at in a minute. So this bedroom was really more about the desk. And you can see here, that's just sort of the bedroom without any changes. The bed is unmade. We wound up turning the bed 90 degrees to be up against the wall. So it didn't really play as an element that we saw in the frame. And it was all about a kid at a desk working and building a birdhouse and learning about things with this app. So you can see the mirror there in the background. Eventually, what we had to do, because we were seeing the kids from the angle that we were shooting in, which was towards the desk, of course, we could see the kid's head in the mirror just slightly. So we did a little cheat, which is you take and ball up a piece of gaffer's tape. In this case, we had some crumpled pieces of paper that were left over from when she was drawing. So we would just take a piece of that, put it into the mirror, and you just lift it up underneath. It doesn't really read on camera if you don't do it too much, but because it was tilted upwards, we didn't see that reflection anymore. So that's that location. And then let's go to the location that I can show you a little bit of the lighting setup, which again was what we used in the other one that we just looked at. So here's a bedroom, and you can sort of see it as it was before it was set dressed. And that's what we basically then turned into this. And the idea was we needed to see dinosaurs, so it's very dino heavy. You can see the dinosaur comforter on the bed and lots of dinosaurs everywhere else. We sourced the rug and a lot of the other elements there. Luckily, I have 3 kids, so there's still things around the house that we could also bring in for that. And the lighting setup is probably the biggest thing, because if you look frame left, we essentially, or the DP essentially created a book light. So we started with a 720B again from Nanlite, the Forza, same light we used for the exteriors, and that's being pushed into this sort of tunnel, which is bouncing off of the walls and then coming through this 4x6 frame, which is actually from the C47 booklight kit, which comes with 2 4x6 frames. I'll put a link to it. And what you do is you take these swing hinges that come with it, you break the 2 frames apart, and we actually had both of those frames that we could use in production. And this is just a half grid cloth, and then we just laid it on the bed, and it just became the diffusion. So we're bouncing into the walls, and then we're diffusing through that panel. It's a very versatile kit because you don't just have to use it as a booklight. In fact, we were using it as a booklight. We just weren't using the other half. We're using the walls and everything else for that. And then you'll see that there's a second light there, and that's because we just weren't getting enough output to balance outside the windows, because we wanted to be able to see the sky and some of the foliage and things. So we have a 300B2 also pushing into there, so we had more output. That's basically it. I mean, there wasn't a lot else going on in terms of the setup. We kind of let the spaces do the rest in terms of creating a little bit of shape. And again, I can't, unfortunately, share the final frames where you see the talent in there. But again, for the birdhouse setup, we just basically did the same exact thing with the booklight on the left-hand side. We boomed the microphone from the opposite side of the key to make sure we didn't have strange shadows cast on our talent. And we were really taking it from the height of the talent. So in all three of those setups, we basically, for the outside, the camera was very low for the picnic. For the kid at the desk, it was basically eye line was basically the same as the kid in terms of where the camera was. And this is all handheld. And then for the dyno scene, same thing. So the camera was much, much lower, and the DP was basically sitting on an Apple box. I think wound up sitting on that Apple box. Originally Chicago, wound up LA. If you don't know what that means, maybe I'll do an episode on that at some point. So there you go. That is a little bit of a behind the scenes. I'm happy to answer more questions about it. It's really hard when you're doing production to be able to spend a lot of time showing all of those elements, but hopefully that's something. Hopefully you're learning something. Don't forget to, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Daily Drop.